Hey there, Icarus here. Been a while, hasn't it? Turns out that having to take care of two brand new Doom baby arrivals, what with all the feeding and the changing and the feeding and the changing, doesn't leave a lot of room for me to be able to focus on YouTube stuff. I have, however, been able to carve out a little time to dedicate to the old Twitch streaming. You may or may not have caught me over at twitch.tv/Mr_Icarus, whereupon I have been doing a deep dive into the recent bountiful selection of fresh FPS demos courtesy of Steam Next Fest. So, what better in the wake of all that than to give you a concise rundown of things that piqued my interest during my demo binge? There were certainly a few. But before I delve deep into them, I do feel compelled to mention a few honorable entries that I didn't play during the course of Next Fest, but do have pre-existing demo experience with. Of that, Fortune's Run is well worth your interest. Cyberpunk by way of industrial grime Star Wars is probably the best way for me to describe its general overall vibe. And as for its moment-to-moment nuts and bolts gameplay, it is mechanically dense, complex, and actually quite challenging to master. Certainly not the type of game that I imagine you'll pick up for a casual play, but more one that you play to thoroughly immerse yourself within. Sulaco is another firm favorite on the pre-existing list. Think fear, but less so on the side of the horror and the slow-mo, and more on the satisfying raw tactility of gunplay, environmental destruction, and enemies that feel like they've actually got some reasonable intelligence behind them. It's all couched in this really nicely designed and aesthetically pleasing sci-fi world that is so detailed that you'd forget that it's actually running within GZ Doom. Genuinely fun, well worth a spin. Beyond Sunset brings yet more cyberpunk, but with a decidedly more vaporwave-esque aesthetic. Using advanced movement mechanics to traverse its large intertwining levels, you'll not only contend with Yakuza, robots, and zombies, but also delve into cyberspace as you search for the secrets behind your lost memories. It's honestly a lot of fun. I love the way it looks, I love the way it sounds, and while I find the moment-to-moment combat entertaining enough, I mean, you can deflect bullets and cleave people in half with a samurai sword for God's sake, it's the boss battles that really stand out here for me. They are genuine challenges that honestly put you to the test, forcing you to pay close attention to what the enemy is doing, while also pulling as many tricks out of your bag as possible to secure victory. Rounding out the honorable mentions list, we have Rise of the Triad Ludicrous Edition Shareware Demo. If you're looking for a taste of what Night Dive and New Blood have done when it comes to bringing this classic up to modern playable standards, then honestly, look no further. This will give you snippets of levels from across the multiple episodes within Rise of the Triad, while also letting you have a spin of the various options available to you when it comes to accessibility, screen resolutions, and just the general gameplay bells and whistles. For me, it gave me a pure old-fashioned shot of nostalgia. I've got a lot of love for Rise of the Triad, and if you've never experienced it before, maybe this will help you gain a little bit of appreciation for it too. So with that out of the way, let's get into the nitty-gritty of what caught my particular attention in the FPS category during Next Fest. How about we start with Echo Point Nova? If you're not familiar with Greylog Studio, they were previously responsible for Severed Steel, a very stylish shooter featuring slow-mo, acrobatic gunplay, largely couched within relatively claustrophobic environments. It's this latter attribute that Echo Point Nova flips almost completely on its head. Goodbye claustrophobic hallways, hello floating islands in the sky. Naturally, this will require a few addendums to the movement mechanics in order to traverse, and that's where you say hello to not just a grapple hook, but also a goddamn hoverboard, which makes you roughly 99.9% more radical than any enemy you could potentially come up against. Of which, these islands are infested by a rogue mercenary force that isn't too happy to see you, and the feeling is mutual. The satisfaction factor is very high with this one. Once you get into its particular rhythm of movement and shooting, it really does hit a particular groove. Outside of the combat, the exploration and traversal is actually pretty fun in its own right too, finding interesting ways to ascend from one location to the next. And guess what? If you think this looks fun as a single player experience, imagine the chaos when you bring a friend along for the ride, because believe it or not, this can function as a co-op experience too, all accessible in the current available demo. Next up, we have Lunar Abyss, a complete surprise for me. Was completely unaware of its existence prior to checking out demos during Next Fest, and was suggested to me thanks to a handful of my viewers. So, what the heck is Lunar Abyss? Well, it's kind of difficult to describe. Couched within a atmospheric and enticing world of monochrome and red, you take on the role of Forks, a prisoner tasked with exploring this strange and unusual world. Now, rather than your typical FPS shenanigans, however, the practice of movement and control and combat here is actually much more reminiscent of the likes of Metroid Prime. Less reliant on pinpoint accuracy and more using lock-on to keep track of your enemy while just dodging the absolute plethora of projectiles launched in your general direction. So yeah, you could say there's a touch of bullet hell in here too. It's an utterly fascinating mix, all couched within this extremely enigmatic world with tremendous visual design that I just couldn't help but find myself drawn into. And just as you feel like you're beginning to get a bead on what's going on here, the demo ends and leaves you wanting so much more. Genuinely intrigued by this one. It's just unconventional compared to what I usually enjoy in my FPS games, and I genuinely look forward to finding out how deep this particular abyss goes. Slipping neatly into the boy I hope this doesn't awaken something in me genre of throwback FPS comes Hellslinger, a GZ Doom-powered joint that sees you donning either the aggressively tight trousers of its primary character, that of the titular Hellslinger herself, or Veronica, a tactical skewed wolf lady who would seem to also have a difficult time fitting into her clothing. Apparently there's an extra 2 classes to be added to the full release of Hellslinger, but for the purposes of the demo playthrough and just to keep things simple, I stuck to the title character. Casting a casual eye over Hellslinger, you'll note that it boasts a rather distinctive comic book style, thick lines and bold colors, lending a fresh twist to the usual tried and tested aesthetics of Infernal Realms, whereas the gameplay contained within is fast, furious, and possessing of a few interesting quirks that add a little bit of additional depth. Melee kills, for example, will help you generate additional health from fallen enemies. Grenade kills will force enemies to drop additional ammunition, whereas a specialized active ability that Hellslinger possesses will allow you to fire a concussive shot, stunning enemies, making them a bit easier to deal with. Throw in a few additional movement mechanics such as dashing and double jumping, and you've got yourself something that takes more than a pinch of inspiration from the likes of New Doom, but mercifully still manages to retain its own particular sense of identity and personality. The weaponry here is pleasingly meaty, the combat, which I experienced on hard difficulty, satisfying and challenging, whilst the levels themselves have a wonderful sense of flow to them where they don't ever feel like you're being directed in anything that feels like a linear fashion, but always manages to loop you back around to where you need to be. Overall, pretty damn good, looking forward to playing more of it, and overall, it's just nice to see so many GZ Doom Engine games popping up during the course of something like Next Fest. Makes you proud to see real strong games like this emerge from the Doom modding community. Speaking of which, Captain Wayne is yet another of the GZ Doom pantheon, with a style that blows right past comic book and straight into cartooning. Captain Wayne is a relentlessly fast-paced shooter where the central driving conceit is, they stole my ship, now I'm going to ruin their lives. This is just absolutely stacked with personality and mayhem and madness, and he has a shotgun arm, and it's just so much fucking fun. The melee has wonderful weight behind it, the guns have tremendous boom, and I don't really need to say much more other than just friggin' play it. Seriously, words cannot adequately describe the experience of just playing it yourself. Outside of GZ Doom entries during the course of NextFest, another thing I noticed was an absolute metric ton of roguelite FPSs. You know the deal, you run through a series of randomized rooms, often with different configurations of enemies, hazards, augments that you can slot into your character for bonuses, and then when you kick the bucket, you can unlock additional ones back at a safe house or whatever, and then hopefully utilize them in your next successive run. Deadlink pretty much sticks to the formula on that front, but what made it stick out to me much more than any other roguelite entry on the docket is the feel and the presentation. Firstly, I'm a sucker for cyberpunk. What can I say? I think it's cool. Doubly so when it utilizes the concept to put you in disposable android bodies, whereupon you can then go on rampages against street gangs, megacorps, and whatever else they dare to throw in your way. Secondly, the feel of the weapons and the movement here has both a fluidity and heft to it. It's kind of hard to describe, but in the moment, it feels just right. In practice, it feels a lot like the roguelite Doom Eternal. You'll be hot swapping between weapons and abilities, grapple hooking and dodging, but crucially, you don't feel anywhere near as nailed down to particular recipes of combat, which is where Doom Eternal started to kind of wear me out. But yeah, if that sounds good to you, Doom Eternal style arena roguelike combat with robots, cyborg, mercenaries, give Deadlink a go. If you like the demo, there's even more of it available in early access form. But hey, at this point, got nothing to lose by giving it a spin. And finally, we get to Calcium Contract. This is an entry that I'm not actually sure turned up during the course of NextFest proper for whatever reason, but is one that I would assuredly recommend. Firstly, I'm sure you'll agree, it's a bit of an unusual looking game, not to mention the unusual title, but the Calcium Contract in question refers to the notion that all that lives must die, but what happens when something refuses the contract? Well, that's where our particular member of the Calcium Order comes into play. Traveling to an island ruled over by the contract-defying bird serpent, you must now battle your way across it whilst contending with the myriad variations of minions that stand in your way. Now, on a visual front, I could easily see a lot of people looking at this going, huh? The heck is this? The heck is that? Why is there a skull vomiting into my gun? And the only answer I have to that is, who cares? It's delightful. No joke, I absolutely love Calcium Contract. There is just something precision engineered about it, the way it looks, the way it plays, the way it feels, the way it sounds, that just tickles the joy centers of my brain. Maybe it's my proclivity for visual absurdism, but just I love the enemy designs. Even more so, I love the way the weapons are animated. So, as before, you'll notice there's these tiny little spirit skulls hovering around my weapons, and for every single weapon, they contribute something to either the firing or reload animation. And it's a joy to watch every single time. Certainly doesn't hurt that, in of itself, every weapon here seems to have some kind of satisfying punch to it, which is very surprising when you consider the strange noises that some of these weapons actually emit when you fire them. The actual raw combat against enemies here is no slouch either. Particular enemies will have their own particular attributes or attacks, and in combination, they can often stack together into troublesome formations. One enemy in particular causing other enemies in the vicinity to teleport at regular intervals, making them kind of difficult to keep track of. The way that Calcium Contract keeps track of your progress is kind of interesting too. The closest analog I can think of is the system in Duke Nukem World Tour, where you can kind of scrub back and forth along the timeline, whereas this actually keeps track of particular events throughout the level, such as picking up a key or getting a particular power-up, so that if you do kick the bucket, you can just rewind to that particular point and pick it back up from there. No quick saving required, and it's just kinda neat. But man, this was absolutely the biggest surprise of the week for me. Loading this up, expecting nothing in particular, and just getting a shot of pure joy to the nervous system. I know it may not be the same for you. I might just be a weirdo that's geared to enjoy these kind of things, but put that aside, and honestly, give it a try. Anyways, that about wraps up my personal best-of list for the FPS category at NextFest this year. These demos are all still freely available, even though NextFest is now officially finished. So you got no excuse, you can still give them a try, and I'd love to hear about what you thought about them in the comments below. Best possible scenario for me is maybe I clued you into a few hidden gems that you wouldn't have discovered otherwise. And if you're interested in checking out the larger selection of demos that I played throughout Next Fest, of which there are many more, you can find the highlights for each individual demo over on the Twitch archive channel, which would be Icarus live streams. If you want to catch me live, once again, the Twitch channel is twitch.tv/Mr_Icarus. While I'm at it, I'd love to say a great big thank you to all of the patrons that help keep this leaky dumpster of a YouTube channel afloat. I'd be honored if you consider joining those esteemed names currently scrolling up the screen right now. $1 do, getting you early access as well as myriad other benefits. And until next time, which hopefully shouldn't be as long as the wait between the last video and this video, this has been Mr. Icarus. Thank you very much for watching. Icarus out.